academic point of view about what we're talking about when people behave badly. It's not that they intend, in many cases, to be bad actors, to stymie the political system of making decisions, to make the planning process work. It's that they usually have something that's important to them that they're trying to express and trying to help people come to another way of seeing the problem, perhaps. And all of this gets wrapped up in this sort of conflict management theory and all the other stuff that comes with that. Certainly the structure of how we develop our boards and the processes like the bylaws and all that kind of stuff has something to do with how those conflicts express themselves, but it always comes back to this very human element that skill building can help people see how they're behaving, sort of be a self-reflective person, and also how what they're doing might engender some kind of reaction from other people. So with that in mind, every conflict takes two parties, right? Yes. I get you when your blood sugar is high. We all just had cheesecake. Yes. Okay, so there's really three types of conflict you might encounter when somebody gets their ire up. The first one is good conflict that we hope to have as part of our democratic process, as part of the planning process. That's known as task conflict. That's when you're having those discussions among yourselves, perhaps in an office or on the dais as a commission board member, where you're trying to get at the kernel of an issue. You're trying to, what is it that we need to make a decision about? Or here are three different options that we're trying to select among. How do we come about to making our determination? How do we make those selections? That's task-based conflict. You're having a discussion with the outcome in mind. Everyone's attention is focused into making sure that the benefit of the decision is realized, right? Everything from where do you want to go out to eat tonight, which is a perennial conversation in our house, which never has a good resolution, but at least we're task-based, to how are we going to restructure our comprehensive planning process so that it works to the benefit of the planning document, okay? So that's task-based conflict. The other one is pretty much the exact opposite. It's the one that everybody thinks of when we think about conflict. It's the not good one. It's the one where once you've made your choice that we're going to go out to eat and your spouse says, I don't know, where would you like to go? The things sort of devolve, right? It's the one where it's personality-based. It's something where it's not about the outcome of the decision. It's about someone's attitude, failed understanding of what was expected of them or of yourself. And so someone may have reacted negatively to something you said, and of course your reaction to them is equal and opposite, right? Well, they don't think I'm very smart, so I'm going to make sure that they know that I'm smart for the next 20 minutes. So that's usually an interpersonal conflict. It has nothing to do with getting to the resolution, and they're ones that are hard to deal with, right? The third one is the actual process of decision making, the actual process about how should we arrive at an answer. And those can be sometimes good and sometimes bad. They don't necessarily devolve into bickering perhaps, but they're ones about that can be important about how do we again, how do we structure our planning process, making an example, so that we get a good product out the end, so that people are happy with what we've done. But sometimes that process stuff can get into talking about who's in charge. And so who is a good leader, who's a good follower, what does it look like when somebody is trying to assert their humongous ego and say, I am now the leader, when they are not the chair, perhaps, of the board or commission. And so they're trying to demonstrate how magnanimous they are in their decision making, totally violating perhaps the process that you have in place for decision making, and therefore letting things kind of get off on track to more of an interpersonal conflict. Okay? So those are the three types of conflict. Each one kind of comes with some opportunities for staying away from the interpersonal conflict, or perhaps maybe shaping up a little bit of how we work out in the locality. So task-based conflicts, you might want to take a look at things like conflict of interest and freedom of interest statutes, right? They keep things on the table. We're not making decisions in the bathroom. We're making decisions right in front of everyone in our community. We have to, by law. We have to make sure that we're not doing something that is going to create acrimony in the community later because we wanted to do something in our own self-interest, perhaps. So there's some conflict avoidance techniques, is actually knowing and abiding by COYA and FOIA law. Also, does anybody here take an oath of office? If you're a planning commissioner or a BZA member, do you guys?
BZA has to, of course, but planning commission is local option.
So by show of hands, oath of office? Very few people. We actually have a good article that was written by Grehan, Taves, Pandak, and Stoner a few years back on the oath of office, and we might even have a video of that, I'm not sure.
Yes.
On YouTube. That's a good review. You can read that article about the importance of oath of office. I provided sort of the standard quote here on your sheet. So thinking about your responsibility to the public and how you embrace your duties, and it's not just a pleasantry that you're a planning commissioner, but it's actually, there's a rule of law. You are mandated, if you are holding that appointment, to carry out the business of the public. So there's a necessity of how you think and what attention you bring to that task that needs to be recognized. And an oath of office may be one way of determining how you see that in your own mind and how you conduct yourself within a public setting. Interpersonal conflict, these are ones, sometimes I've heard other people suggest that community planning is sometimes actually community therapy, in the same way that you might go to a family therapist or a personal talk therapy doctor. Community therapy is a real thing. When you get into these interpersonal conflicts, bringing in an outside resource that has a huge skill set for facilitation or mediation can be a means for actually resolving whatever interpersonal conflict is in front of you that's keeping you from being effective as a board or commission. In the same way, being able to look at sort of the ethics of how you conduct the business as a board or commission could be useful. There are professional societies that have standards and expectations about what is expected of those professionals. So lawyers, Andrew, you guys have a code of ethics? As a practitioner of the law, do you have an association that has a code of ethics? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yes, we've got very detailed professional responsibility guidelines that are dictated by the Supreme Court of Virginia, and there are rules, there are guidance documents. That's all regulated through the Virginia State Bar.
Okay, so you actually have an association, and it's an expectation of a practitioner of the law that you have to, by mandate.
Right, and if you trip over something that's mandatory, then the Virginia State Bar can sanction you, take away your license temporarily, permanently, etc.
Thank you. Now, of course, you wouldn't be getting into such dramatic or necessarily detailed territory if you were to adopt some kind of ethics code for your own body. But it could be something where it sets a standard or an expectation about how people are to conduct their business, what's expected of them by the public, all those kinds of things. We will, abide by COYA and FOIA law. Those kinds of things are stated plainly. So there's no walking around saying, "Oh, I didn't know it existed." You have a code of ethics that you might sign at the beginning of your term, and so you can't say you didn't know, and all those kinds of things. Process conflict. Again, you look at your bylaws. If it's written down somewhere and you can read it, then it enables you to understand the expectations of what you should be doing and how you should be doing that business. Does everybody have bylaws? And when was the last time you updated those bylaws? Recently? Put all your hands up within the last 18 months. That's pretty actually not bad. Yeah.
Does anyone not have bylaws? Or doesn't know whether or not you have bylaws? Does anyone have bylaws that have not been reviewed by the current commission in, say, the last 12 to 24 months? You need to, and that's Joan's point, review your bylaws. But think about what bylaws represent. Bylaws are the compilation of the reason why you exist, what you're there to do, how you're to do what you're there to do, and it establishes the protocol and the relationship from member to member internal to that board or that commission. It distinguishes the officers from the members, outlines the duties of the officers, it provides guidance relative to the role of the chair or committee chairperson. Do any of your bylaws spell out the duties of individual members of the board or commission, in addition to outlining the responsibilities of the chair, vice chair, and potentially secretary? We tend to come up short in Virginia and most other states because we'll define the purpose of the chairman's role and what he or she is to do, and the vice chair, but we don't specifically articulate or provide rationale for what each member of the board or commission is to do. And some say, well, why do that? We know we have a planning commission or a BCA or a board of supervisors. We know what we're to do. But by memorializing it in a statement of bylaws, bylaws represent an implied contractual obligation between member to member and member to the larger community being served by that board or commission. Much like the taking an oath of office upon appointment. Several of you do that, and that's, I think, particularly noteworthy. Is the oath of office administered only at your appointment to the board or commission? Do you repeat that or reaffirm that oath on an annual basis? That might be something to think about. Yes. When your term ends, so if you're appointed and you have an oath of office, Mr. Smith, and you're reappointed 4 years later, you would reaffirm that same oath. Over the many years of being in this business, I've found favor increasingly to have an oath of office be a given. Prefer not to see it as a mandate, but I think there's something to be said for, as Jonas points out, raise your right hand and repeat after me these words. And then think about the symbolism of doing that at your organizational meeting each year. You're not reaffirming or retaking the oath necessarily, but as a group, you're standing up and you're reaffirming that as a member of a board or a commission, you are solemnly swearing to uphold the Constitution of the respective states and execute the duties of the office to the best of your ability. That's a nice reminder, as well as a pledge to the public that you serve, that this is a guiding light that you're going to use as you, again, witness the duties and responsibilities that have been extended to you. Yes, Ladina.
I was curious, we were talking this morning about...
Hold on, we need to be able
Yeah,
to
it's
hear
good, Mike. We forgot to do that this morning. We should have.
This morning we were talking about the importance of keeping the comprehensive plan kind of at the forefront of thoughts and that sort of thing. I was wondering if anybody incorporates any language in their bylaws in terms of, recognizing a comprehensive plan.
Yes. We don't see that very commonly in Virginia. Over the many years of doing these programs, we've benefited from receipt of bylaws from most every county, city, and town. I used to have a better command of that literature than I do at this present time, but at the same time, trying to think of an example that comes into play. There have been jurisdictions that will specifically indicate that as a planning commission for Lynchburg, that their responsibility is to prepare and recommend a comprehensive plan for the city of Lynchburg, and that comprehensive plan will be sent to the governing body, and that is a chief byproduct or product that the planning commission is responsible for. And then in administering or being, not governing, but by the administration of the planning commission then is obliged to be created by the Code of Virginia and is to meet periodically. And then the rest of the bylaws explain how the commission will be organized, the number of members, and what the officers will do, and that sort of thing. So at the outset, they talk about a comprehensive plan, but I like your idea that maybe internal to our bylaws for a planning commission, we might indicate what the products of that body will be. which will be a mandated comprehensive plan. For some of you, you have to have zoning if you're under the Chesapeake Bay Act. You have to have a subdivision ordinance. CIP is local option. But I think you're making an excellent point that by including in your bylaws a narrative that describes what you're there to do and the products that you're going to be party to in terms of their creation and then administration is a very sound idea. Because the bylaws help us understand what we're to do, but the bylaws also represent sort of a social contract with the larger community. So I like your idea. Wonderful suggestion. Other comments or questions maybe before we proceed further into this conversation? Yes.
Mike, well, we actually put in there land development ordinance, the duties of not just BZA, but also the planning commission and the planning and zoning administration.
Take it from the top, as they say, so that everybody can hear your point.
Yeah, in our new land development ordinance, we actually put in the ordinance itself, not just the duties of the BZA, which is almost par, but also the duties of the planning commission, which
Excellent.
The comprehensive plan is one. Also the duties of staff, planning and zoning commission.
I think the more that we can be forthcoming and be sort of transparent so people understand who we are, what we do is to our advantage. It also is instructive in terms of, again, how each of us relate to one another. That sort of addresses some of the potential task conflicts that Jonah features in the first part of the material, but also the potential of addressing some of the process conflicts because of how we're going to do the public's business. That becomes a point of silence or void in most bylaws. It doesn't talk about how you're going to do the job of the PC or do the job of the BZA member. But there's nothing that suggests that you shouldn't give thought to that and put that in your bylaws, or at least make that part of your, as several of you do, your rezoning application forms or your BZA application forms. Many communities today have an overview of what it means to get a rezoning, what the rezoning steps will be, and what the staff and commission and governing bodies are going to be looking for with respect to processing the rezoning. So the more that we can explain these relationships, the better off we're going to be.
I just put the question back to Dennis, which is by putting all that in writing, have you had a lot of conflicts arise or a lot of conflicts be mitigated by the fact that somebody could go back and reference
Well,
those statements?
it's been fairly new, but I would say the one thing that when we were working on the ordinance, what it led to was, oh, that's why I was doing that. That's why I was doing this, etc. So we all understand each other's jobs a little bit better.
Yeah, in some respects, the bylaws, and of course now, are bylaws required? The answer is yes. You have to have rules for the transaction of business, which is the narrative that we see in the Code of Virginia when it comes to planning commission and or BZA. So failure to have bylaws, is there a consequence? Nothing. Could a bright attorney like Andrew McRoberts file suit claiming that because the BZA or the planning commission does not have bylaws, or they are present but they were adopted in 1938 and woefully inadequate and out of date, and everything that this jurisdiction has done, Your Honor, is null and void because it's outside the purview of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And the code and the code's mandate that they be governed by rules for the conduction of business. Is that attorney, not attorney, but judge going to rule that your plan is null and void, your ordinances are null and void? No. What that judge would do is say, I want a copy of bylaws on my desk in 30 days. So that's the sanction by not having bylaws. By not having bylaws beyond that, I think you're suggesting to the larger public served by you, and here's maybe yet another example of governance and government not abiding by the rules that have been set forth for the players in the governance process. And so the public confidence in what we do might be drawn into question. Because we are a public entity, you're a public entity in terms of a commission or a BZA, or even as planning staff or zoning staff, you do need to be aware that you're in the public light. And the public, in shining a light on you, they'll have certain expectations in their mind as to how you should do your business on their behalf. And so the bylaws, again, coming back to bylaws, represents almost a bit of a social contract, how we're going to do what we're here to do, how we're going to organize ourselves, and how we're going to go about managing the process that's been given us in terms of the authority. And then we're going to revisit those bylaws on a almost, well, it should be, an annual basis. That everybody have a reorganization meeting or organizational meeting. You know, that might be July 1st, it might be, as in Blacksburg, September is the month that the commission re-elects its membership leaders, or they select new commission chair. That's a great opportunity to review not only your bylaws, but all the other procedures that you have in place. So start with your bylaws and put in the bylaws those things that are going to be of potential value to mitigate or address these kinds of conflict situations that might arise. Now, with respect to particular incidences that occur, how do you deal with those? And I think maybe share one or two that came across by way of the survey, or do you just want to?
Yeah, I can get at that a little bit sideways, as I normally do.
Okay.
It strikes me in your comment that there is no natural consequence to, like, a planning commissioner, a singular commissioner, doing something that either makes the board or makes the commission inefficient or ineffective or downright obstructs the business that's to be conducted by the commission. It's not a direct consequence, right? I mean, at the very outside factor, you're going to have maybe a judge that says go back and revisit your bylaws or do something in that regard. But it's an instrument by the fact that they're appointees, and BZAs that are sort of in the same circumstance, that the elected officials are really on the line. So if there are individuals who are not meeting the expectations of the public, it's nice to be able to complain about that if you're the public to someone. But who do you complain to? Do you complain to the elected official? What if that person is okay with behavior, badly behaving?
Well, let's just say that let's just create a scenario wherein we have a 7-member planning commission, and Commissioner A tends to miss 2 meetings for every one he attends. And on occasion might miss 3 or 4 meetings consecutively. And we sometimes are wondering if he will be present if someone is out due to illness. We wonder if he'll be there to create a quorum necessary to conduct the public business. What can we do to address that? Several things popped into my mind's eye, but I'm hoping maybe you'll have some ideas too that you might want to put on the table. Jack?
In New Kent, we actually put that in our bylaws.
Yes, you did.
3 or more meetings in a year, your appointing supervisor will be notified and asked to take corrective action.
So New Kent was one of the first jurisdictions to put in their bylaws, 15, 20 years ago, that if you miss 3 consecutive meetings or more than 25% of the meetings scheduled for any calendar or fiscal year, that will be grounds for termination. Now, can the Planning Commission fire Commission Member A? No, but as Jack points out, it will be communicated to the appointing authority, Board of Supervisors, ideally in your annual report. How many of you do an annual report as a Planning Commission or as a BZA? How many of you are actually writing it as a commission, or do you rely on your staff to write it for you? That's fine too, but at least you're doing an annual report. That too is required. If you don't do an annual report, again, Mr. McRoberts might come out and again get on his soapbox claiming that by not doing an annual report, and you're outside the purview of the law and everything you've done is null and void. The judge will reject that, but the judge will also say, I want to see an annual report on my desk. So you got to do an annual report. So if you have a standard in there that says miss so many meetings in a given period of time, that can be grounds for termination. By sharing the bylaws with the appointing authority, you don't need their permission to write them, nor do you need their permission to adopt them, but by sharing your bylaws with the governing body, and you make a strong case as to why missing meetings without bona fide reason or excuse is not to be accepted or tolerated by the commission, most governing bodies will follow through on that. Now, early on, that was a bit of a challenge in some jurisdictions, but today, in many parts of our Commonwealth, if you have the statement in your bylaws as shared by Jack from Chalmers from the Buchanan County, then that's exactly what the governing body will do. Because they, hopefully, in appointing you, even if it's by magisterial or election district, if I'm the supervisor from the election district A and I suggest this individual, my colleagues acquiesce to my selection, and then my guy doesn't show up, you know, then that's sort of embarrassing to me if I'm taking planning and zoning seriously. And then they would support me in recommending that we thank the person for their contribution and then we appoint someone else. That's what you should. Yes, ma'am.
Is there something in the Code of Virginia about attendance at planning commission meetings?
Yes, there is now. There is in the Code of Virginia. In fact, some of what you all have done locally at in terms of your bylaws is now codified in the Code of Virginia, indicating that planning commissioners in essence can be and should be fired if they miss so many meetings. That was added 2012-ish, 2013. It's a relatively new addition to the code. So yes, it's now in the Code of the Commonwealth that commissioners who fail to perform their services and duties as defined can indeed be dismissed or again thanked for their service and replaced, as should be the case.
Do we have other questions?
Yes. Kelly? Mm-hmm.
So, for 4 years, our planning commission did not do an annual report.
Yes.
And I brought that to their attention. And finally, we got 2015's report.
Yes.
So there are still some missing reports. So my question, I have 2 questions. So where would that need to be going forward? Obviously, to me, I think it's quite important to look at those annual reports so new commissioners coming on know what has happened in the past. But we also are in a situation where the council liaison, and I'm not sure what is thought of in our bylaws, don't say anything about it, the commission bylaws. Our council liaison is now the chair of the planning commission,
Yes.
which I personally find a conflict, even if it were me that was on the position. I wouldn't want to do that. So is that going to be governed just by bylaws determining whether they should or shouldn't be a chair? This just seems like quite a...
There's nothing in the Code of Virginia that, number one, the several points advanced by Kelly Grimm, right? From Town of Purcellville, newly elected to the Purcellville Town Council. Were you on BZA at some point? Or not? Where did we, our paths crossed early on? That's right. Okay. And we came to this. Yeah, gotcha. Okay, but newly elected to the Town Council in Purcellville, asking, we have annual report from 15, but can't seem to find 14, 13, 12, and 11. Is that fatal? No. If you want to know what went on, ideally you would have an annual report, but you do have the records that were generated and through the minutes that are on file in Hooper's office and Purcellville, and you can read those minutes. Again, failing to comply with the state mandate, there is no sanction in the code spelled out. What happens if we don't do an annual report? What happens if we don't have a set of bylaws? What happens if we don't have a comprehensive plan? What happens if we don't appoint a planning commission? That's not just in the field of planning and zoning, that's most everything else in the code that comes to a local government as a sort of a mandate or an implied obligation. Other than the court would say, you need to appoint a planning commission. So the missing annual reports, I think there was an annual report somewhere in there, I think, that you're 15, but since 12, okay. I thought there was one done in 12 or 13. There's a mixed performance there for a lot of different reasons, including the fact that you're a very, very busy, fast-growing jurisdiction, as you know, and limited staff. There was a lot of staff turnover that occurred during that year. That's not meant to excuse the lack of an annual report, but failure to have an annual report on file, there's nothing that says you've got to go back and fill one out. So from this point forward, you hopefully will have annual reports. Okay? Now, the idea that we have a member of the governing body serving on the planning commission, that's permissible under the Virginia statutes. How many have that? A member of the governing body also serves on your planning commission. Does he or she have voting rights? Yes. Anybody that says they don't have voting rights? Okay? That's ex officio, John, in orange. Okay? Is that permissible? Yes, it is. Good. And what would be the basis for that? We would go back to the town charter for the town of Orange, and in that charter, it would, I think, should better say that he or she will not have voting rights. Emily, you all have that in Montgomery or not?
He's just the liaison, he has no voting.
Okay. Having an elected official serve on the planning commission, I like that idea, in part because what our experience was in Blacksburg creates a direct conduit between the commission and the governing body. But it can't put that person in tough positions, because maybe as a planning commissioner, I'm hearing things and I might vote a particular way, then 2 weeks later, I'm sitting in a different seat, but I've got my town council hat on, and I might see something slightly different. Then the burden's on me to be able to explain, well, you saw it that way 2 weeks ago, now you're seeing it different. What caused the transformation, if you will? Therein lies the challenge for the person in that seat. As far as the council member serving on the commission who happens to also be elected chair, is there anything that says that's not possible? Unless it's in your charter for Purcellville, it would preclude that from occurring, and there's nothing that keeps that individual from performing as chair. He's been chair in the past, and he's done a very good job in the past. So, and with some of the turnover that you've had up in Purcellville, it may be why they chose to move in his direction, because of his experience. But if that's something that's disconcerting to you and members of the council, then that might be a reason for why you and the planning commission, town council and planning commission, might get together, once a year to have a conversation, which is advisable to begin with. But no, there's nothing, and unless your charter has a provision, then what's occurring there is perfectly fine in the eyes of the Virginia Code. Now, if you have, do any of you have a member of the administrative staff serving on the planning commission? Code permits that. Hampton city manager is a member of the planning commission with voting rights, but chooses not to exercise the voting rights. Public Works Director and County X or citywide could theoretically serve on the planning commission. Nothing that compels you to appoint that individual, but that person could serve. And that person could be very valuable in terms of what he or she brings to the conversation, but it also can place that person in a difficult position because of the hat they wear Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, if you will. So that's why a lot of us have not moved in the direction of appointing an administrative official to serve on the planning commission.
And I think it also kind of joins in with the conversation about leadership and followership.
Yes.
So if you have a board or commission where you don't have a good, strong sense of who you are, what you're supposed to be doing, and I mean each individual member, then I would think that when you have these other appointees come in that are staff members, all the things that apply to them, to the regular appointees that have a connection to elected officials are not necessarily true of the staff members who hold appointment. And so therefore the sort of awareness building that you might do with a badly behaving commissioner and the relationship to the elected officials would not hold in staff members behaving badly. So you have to have a good leader understanding how the staff member is going to be interacting with the commissioner or the board. And also the rest of the members have to understand when there's something that's been violative of the process or the standards of the board. So you understand that if something goes badly, if the staff member is, I don't know, bullying and trying to get decisions made one way or another because that's what the staff wants, that there are things that the commissioners can do, that there are ways of kind of making sure that the board is being effective and efficient in its duties that don't have that connection back to the elected official that you were pointing at earlier.
And I think a lot of localities do not want to put themselves or their day-to-day employees in that sort of potential crosshairs. And that's quite, I think, understandable and goes a long way in explaining why a lot of jurisdictions do not have a member of the administrative staff serving on the planning commission. How many of the bylaws does the chairman get to vote? How many have a statement in the bylaws that govern what the chair can do and can't do with respect to issues, introduction of motions, seconds, discussions, etc.? Sammy, what do y'all have?
Our chair can vote. He just can't bring up a motion.
Can't bring up a motion. Okay. Right. Can vote, okay, but cannot bring up a motion. Okay. Very good.
Can I ask why that is? Why did you choose to do it that way?
Robert's Rules of Order amended.
Okay, Robert's Rules of Order. How many operate good? How many operate under the Robert's Rules or some other provision? Okay, how many operate under Robert's Rules as applied for smaller groups and have specifically made that notation? Short of that, then, when you say you're operating under Robert's Rules, an implication is that all 750 or 800 pages are in play. And most of us, myself included, know just enough Robert's Rules to probably get ourselves in trouble. Exactly. So, David, you all in Hanover, you've adopted Robert's Rules, but in parentheses, simplified procedure applied to small groups. And what's the big difference when we come to small groups with Colonel Roberts' Rules of Order? Typically, if there's a motion, most of us assume that what? Has to receive a second if we're going to discuss it. Okay, under simplified procedure, a motion is meritorious on its own. It doesn't need a second. Most of us would say we begin discussing an issue and somebody might say, point of order, there's no motion on the floor, so we're acting outside the purview of Robert's Rules. We can't discuss an item without benefit of a motion. Well, under simplified procedure, you can begin discussing an item of business without benefit of a motion. Okay? What else under simplified procedure comes to play?
Well, I was just going to say, so I think the takeaway from that discussion is to have some sort of either internal training or have somebody come in and do a review and sort of refresher on the rules of order that you're using and know what you're using, so that you don't have these stumbling blocks.
Now,
when you get into a situation where you say, well, I think this is the rule, or you suggest that this is what we do here, and somebody else has a different expectation, absolutely they're going to roll from being sort of a process conflict to one being interpersonal, right? It's like somebody coming up here and grabbing the microphone.
You've got to be consistent. And you've got to be consistent. We're going to use Robert's Rules comprehensively, or we're going to use Robert's Rules as applied to simplified procedure, which is about 16 pages instead of 750. But you should spell that out, include it in your descriptive narrative that constitutes your bylaws. So there's no question. The other thing with simplified procedure, the chair could be a maker of a motion, and the chair could be fully engaged in the discussion. Do any of you have bylaws that says the chair cannot be a maker of a motion? The chair votes at the end. Sometimes even with small towns and cities, the mayor doesn't vote except in case of a tie. or votes at the end of the deliberation. Right? But some of the issues that might plague you in terms of member performance, the best way to deal with them is one, through your bylaws, because you could, in your bylaws, address the issue of individual member performance. That's why when we say these are the duties of the chair, the vice chair, we should also have a next section, these are the duties of the members of the planning commission. And in there you could say, we expect all members to be present. If you're not going to be present, you will call the chair or a member of the local governing body or staff and indicate that you will not be present in order to potentially have an excused reason for your absence. If you're to have an excused reason, then on the minutes, in summary, it would show my name and then in parentheses, absent. Okay? So you could do it that way. And then you can also move in the direction of, some of you have seen this in the past, standards of conduct. Do any of you have adopted standards of conduct or code of performance for your commission and or BCA? How many of you don't know? Yeah, okay. How many of your governing bodies have a rule of procedure or standard of conduct, or do you know? Right. You got that in book here, don't you, Bob? In fact, it's an extended statement in terms of procedure. And if I'm not mistaken, I think maybe I'm confusing you all now, but counties begin to kind of run together after all the years. It's the procedures for the Board of Supervisors, but I'm thinking it also indicates that it's the same procedures would apply to all appointed boards and commissions.
Code of ethics procedures and code of ethics applies to all.
Yeah, okay. But it's actually spelled out for the Board of Supervisors. It's multi-pages, and it's very well done. And it's something that, you know, we might think about adopting as a board or a commission. But we sometimes think this is, gosh, this is preemptive, and we're assuming the worst in people having rules that address standards of conduct or performance. Well, the advantage to be gained is that this becomes a dictum or a standard by which each of us are going to witness the behavior implicit with our appointment to the board or commission. We're expected to be there. We expect to do our homework. When we open our mouths and contribute, it's going to be in the vein of advancing the business of the board or commission. If Joe says something, I think that's kind of outside the realm of where we are. I'm not to suggest that Mr. Vogel, you know, you're as stupid as the day is long, you know, that kind of thing. We're going to be respectful to one another.
So I can see the two of us. Here's Mike. He actually brings the standard of conduct with him and points out, I'd like to talk to Mr. Vogel about this.
Then I push it aside and do whatever the hell I want to do, you know.
So we're just on a you know, people get into these conflicts, and they're, you know, we're trying to help them not get into these conflicts. But if they do, is it appropriate to do that in front of people at a meeting?
Well,
or how does it get raised? And I'm assuming that it's the chair that's not the chair.
Yes, it becomes the chair's obligation, and then depending upon the nature of the witness behavior, if it's nagging and irritation and an itch that you feel like you need to scratch, or is it this, you know, 800-pound gorilla in the room that's really disruptive, you know, then increasingly the eyes are going to be on the chair. And quite possibly the chair is maybe racking his or her brain trying to figure out, well, what can I do? You know, normally Joan is mild-mannered, but he's going off, and he won't refrain from conversation or discussing. One of the ways you deal with that up front, again, back to your bylaws, how many of you say, as a commission or BCA, anyone who wishes to address the board or commission can do so. We ask you to come forward, give us your name, address, and 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. Pretty standard? Okay. All right, once the chair closes the public hearing, then what does the chair do? Typically say, what's the pleasure of the commission? Let's go back to Mr. Roberts, Colonel Roberts, and his rules. Okay, so Mr. Smith has something to say. Let's say a motion's been made. Well, let's just do this. Say a motion has been made and seconded that this item, I move that this, for sake of conversation, that this proposed rezoning be approved. And then there's a second. okay? Then the chair would say, comment. Now, how many of you would then look to the maker of the motion, Mr. Smith, and expect him to speak first because he made the motion? How many do it that way? Okay? And so Sammy would begin speaking. Now, are you required to do it that way? No, but ritual and tradition, if that's in place back home, and you want to memorialize that, again, that would be in your written bylaws, okay? So Sammy speaks, okay? And then once he's finished, then the chair would say, next, any comment beyond that. And that's maybe when Charles would speak up, okay? And then Sammy's just chomping at the bit. I want to say this about that. What's my obligation as chair? You can't speak, Mr. Smith. You've already had your 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Under Robert's rules that all of you operate under by and large, it's standard operating procedure. Mr. Smith doesn't get to address that issue until everyone else has been afforded a chance to talk. And how many of us violate that every time? If we're honest. Okay? So come back to our rules of procedure. Come back to our bylaws. And you're probably thinking, my God, these bylaws are now going from 5 pages to 18. Yeah, they probably will. That's in part what y'all have done up in Fauquier, with respect to your rules of procedure for the Board of Supervisors. And sometimes length is of importance because it again spells out how we're going to do what we do. But the point I wanted to make was that when we say to the public, and even the applicant, you know, you've got 10 minutes, you've got 20 minutes, what have you, we're saying to everyone, you know, be cognizant of the time. A simpler construct should apply to us as members of the Planning Commission or BZA or governing body. We're not going to say, Mr. Smith, you have 3 minutes, where do you live? We're not doing that, but a similar commitment to being direct, succinct, non-repetitive, with points being made, should apply to us as well. And that'll help expedite the business before us. Okay?
That's good. I think it's about time to wrap up the session so we don't bleed into the next.
So we want to maybe share a couple of these things with the group. And then I know there were a couple of issues that popped up, and I don't know if you wanted to bring one or two up or not, you know, in terms of, or maybe somebody would care to proffer a situation we could respond to. In part, I guess we have, in the sense that somebody says somebody's acting badly, what do we do? Well, if that's occurring, and I'm sitting there, and I'm in the chair, and I have my wits about me, and I have a gavel, I would gavel the member back to session and ask the member to refrain from further comment out of courtesy to other members, or that witness behavior is contrary to good board performance as reflected in our bylaws. That might cause that person to shut up just for a half a second. What the hell's he talking about in our bylaws? Well, see, that bringing him back to the fact that we have bylaws, and in our bylaws, whether we say it or not, the expectation is that we're going to not only be there, we're going to come prepared, we'll have done our homework, and we're going to treat each other in a manner which we all would like to be treated. You know, we're going to act in a proper forum, we're going to dress properly for meetings, and we're not going to be abusive sitting there. So my goal is to get him quiet, okay? And hopefully he or she would respond to my plea to get back in line, if you will. If the person continues to, and in fact becomes belligerent, then rather than directly going maybe one more time, say that your behavior is not conducive to proper business environment for us to do our job as a planning commission. And I will ask that you formally refrain from further comment. Failing to do so, I will call for an immediate recess and then reconvene once we deal with this issue one-on-one. And if it came to that, that's what I would do. We'd call for a recess. If an attorney is present, they might have to call on that individual, but we would have to maybe look at Robert's rules, depending on what procedure we've adopted, and deal with the person. Maybe talking to the individual one-on-one would be a way to address the issue. continues to witness poor behavior in terms of now getting borderline and disruptive, so we can't do our public's business, then we could, as a commission, seek to sanction that individual. We would suspend the rules in terms of the public business. We would look at how we would deal with a disruptive member during an actual meeting. It would be much easier to do so by having some narrative already in our bylaws. So we can pull from Robert's rules, either simplified or the 750 pages, and we can deal with that individual. The goal is to keep us from doing the public's business. Now, I will ask the individual to remove himself from the dais, and if fail to do so, then we'll seek law enforcement to come in and help move the person out. This actually happened in a couple of unnamed counties to the north several years back, and one actually was removed from the meeting and subsequently was terminated from the Planning Commission because of his behavior, his arrogance, and his threats, both bodily harm and otherwise, to other members of the commission. So he was summarily dismissed by the board.
In the news, in the news lately, there has been a board supervisor, and he's been behaving poorly, but I noticed in the minutes that instead of adjourning the meetings, they have been recessing them, and I asked for a reason why, and they said so they didn't have to put a public notice in the newspaper. Is this right, wrong, or BS?
I don't know. I don't know if Andrew's in the room. I could say it's right. I could say it's wrong. I think typically a recess is a suspension. I'm assuming my definition for recess is we're suspending the meeting and we'll not move forward. We'll pick back up at this three nights from now or next Wednesday night. That still doesn't address the issue, and sometimes the gaming that's underway might well be that's the goal of the perpetrators, to disrupt and derail what it is we're trying to do. And if you take that approach, I wouldn't fall victim to it a second time. I'd be ready and prepared to have the person escorted out of the room.
We got one more point to make over here, and then we've got a loop break.
I just want to know, what if it's your chairperson that's misbehaving?
Very good point. And that sometimes is the case.
It is, and if the rest of the commission will not address that chairperson.
Somebody has to step forward and address the chairperson and indicate to him or her that he or she is out of line, he or she is not following the bylaws, the rules of procedure, or our adopted protocol in terms of how we're going to conduct the public's business.
Is that someone's staff?
No, that's someone who's a member of the commission. Someone sitting there as a member of the commission. Okay, if we've sat through a good meeting, sometimes we might say it's because I'm so damn good as chair. No, we all bask in the sunshine of a good meeting, as we should. In a bad meeting, fingers get pointed. If the chairman is out there twisting slowly in the breeze, he's a colleague of yours. She's a colleague of yours. You're a team. You're a collective entity known as the Planning Commission or BZA. And if they're going down the wrong path, you need to draw their attention to the fact that, Mr. Chairman, you know, this is not appropriate and blah, blah, blah. Typically, the vice chairman might sit close to the chair, or a more seasoned member or the most veteran member of the commission who has good command of procedure and Robert's rules will be nearby. But we all have to be on our toes, because if the chairman's doing something and he or she's the reason for the dysfunction, then it's hard to do. We might not want to do it in public, but we want to bring it to their attention that, you know, we went off course tonight on issue 1, 2, 3. And hopefully we won't do that in the future. Or if that happens again, then I'm going to bring the objection and make it known as a member of the commission.
So
that's no point of order.
Yeah, so we've tried to help a little bit today with people who are individuals who are behaving badly, whether by way of incompetence, not knowing that duties and powers that they have as part of their commission. But we also try to deal a little bit with conflict. Those things are going to happen, and there's no getting away from them. Of course, with anything related to planning, the ultimate takeaway is always try to get it done, try to take some of the points that Mike and I have made, and take care of those things, whether the procedural issues or new documents that you like the commissioner board to draft, before you get into a sticky situation, right? So try to find yourselves in a calm place where you can take care of the business of the body without having to be in circumstances of a heated discussion. Find yourselves some good ideas and that you can hold on to and believe in. Review them from time to time, as Sandy Street does. And make sure you understand what is next for you as a body. Of course, we didn't get to everything we'd like to with all of these things. So I'd be remiss if I didn't say, if you have people who are definitely behaving badly, send them to us.
Yeah, we've done in the past, we'll do it in the future. I think the standard of contract code performance, the Baltimore, Maryland example, and each instance, having each of us sign our names to this, affirming that I will abide by these standards, this code, goes a long, long way in helping. Then when I'm behaving badly, you can remind me, oh, remember you signed your name. Yes, Susan.
What if it's not in the code? What if they're behaving badly outside of the commission?
Okay, meaning...
If they're doing something out in the community that has nothing to do with business of the board and they're casting sort of a bad light on the commission.
Or what if they say to their tenants, you don't have to fill out a sign permit and go through the process, don't worry, I'm on the commission.
That was my point about FOIA and FOIA, right? So there's a reportability standard that mandates that business not happen. And if it does happen, and somebody catches wind of it, then it becomes the business of the board, right? So you have to get back on track as quickly as possible and find the public record as standardized as possible. If those things are happening outside of the ethics of the commission, at some point they will come to light, right? And so that's your opportunity for somebody to jump up and down and call a red flag. That's maybe a little bit of a general answer, but to go further is to make another conversation from